Waking up early in the morning, Shiro looked around for a stream where she could quickly clean herself. After a quick wash, she dressed herself back up and called out for the dryad as she had some questions for her in regards to divinities and the like. Since she was a spirit and had her own divinity, Shiro figured that she was probably a source of answers. Yes? You wanted to talk to me? The dryad smiled as she appeared from a nearby tree. I'm just asking, but what exactly are divinities? Shiro asked while sitting on a tree root. Well, divinities are blessings given to you by the gods after you complete the trials. The dryad replied with a smile. So are the gods still in this world? Nope. Some have left a small avatar, while others haven't left anything. The gods have left this world, and the only signs of them ever being here are the towers that represent their trials along with writings on murals that can be found around the world. One of the biggest murals is the Mural of Beginnings, and that explains to you the name of this world along with some of the legends revolving around the 12 main Olympians. There are also some notes on Titans, but not many. The dryad explained. All right, Demos did tell me about the Mural of Beginnings. Are there other large-scale murals like that one? Shiro asked. Unfortunately, no. The Mural of Beginnings is unique, and it's the only one of its size. The dryad shook her head. So what fuels the divinities? There should be an energy source, no? Are we able to harness that energy source and use it at will? Shiro asked, as that was her main question. If she could make use of the energy source, she could make herself helpful even without the use of divinities. Hopefully. Yes, but I don't think you realize how important divinities are. Divinities allow you to harness this power along with protecting you from it. It's a god's protective charm so that the one who passes their trial doesn't explode on contact with this source of energy. Trying to use the energy source without the protective is a guaranteed death, so if you're thinking of trying it, don't. The dryad shook her head, furrowing her brows. Shiro had a frown on her face. Since I'm a spirit, is there anything I can do in my current state then? Kind of. You only get access to them once you get your first divinity. You can't make something out of nothing after all. You need to tap into the energy source. With the divinity, then you can use some of your latent abilities. The dryad explained. Which is very strange since I definitely noticed the faint trace of a sigil on your body, but it's dormant. She tilted her head. What do you mean by that? Shiro asked while glancing down at her arms. Well, sigils are the form of the divinities granted to us. For example, mine is a sigil that's located on my back. The dryad said while turning around. Moving her hair out of the way, a green sigil slowly materialized itself. Remembering that she had received quite a few sigils from the gods back on Mount Olympus, Shiro's smile couldn't help but twitch. Should they all appear at the same time, wouldn't her entire body look like it's been tattooed? That was something she wasn't too keen about. However, while I did say that you can only access them once you get your first divinity, you do still have one thing that you can do. Every time you enter a place filled with nature, your body feels stronger, doesn't it? The dryad asked. It does. Depending on what you do, you can store some of this and use it in small bursts, I suppose. This will increase your physical body only slightly to allow you to fight against monsters. It's not a big boost, so don't get your hopes up. As for the method, it's hard to explain, and it's easier if you figure it out yourself. There's nothing I can do for you either, so you can only rely on yourself. The dryad smiled before disappearing. Hearing this, Shiro raised her eyebrow, but smiled. While the dryad said that it was only a small boost, it was better than nothing since even a small boost can help when it matters. Shaking her head, she started to make her way back to the edge of the forest since Demos should be arriving with some breakfast. And as she had expected, by the time she reached the edge of the forest, Demos was waiting with some food in his bag. Arbadia, it's not much since the town is rationing their supplies, but it's better than nothing. Demos smiled while handing her some pieces of bread. Thank you. Shiro smiled and ate the bread. Amen. I'll be going to research the sapling today. Hopefully, it's still in the early stage of stage 2. If not, the reinforcements will take more time. Also for your ideas, tell me the divinities that you need, and I'll also look for some people that have them. Demos asked. Well, for the acid route, I'll need someone with the divinity of harvest and some grapes. For the explosion route, I'll need someone with the wind divinity and the fire divinity. Hopefully, the wind divinity can shred the wood into fine dust, but I don't know. Shiro replied with a shrug. I see. I'll send a notice out to offensive-based wind divinity users then. As for the dust, how much do you need? Depends on how big the sapling is. From your description of Stage 3, can I assume that it would spread its roots across the entire crater? Shiro asked. MN. During Stage 2, it's spreading its roots to drain the land, hence why when Stage 3 arrives, black roots will explode out of the ground. If it's in the early stages of Stage 2, then the size of the roots will be small. But from what I can tell at this moment, it's at least in the mid-stages. The roots would have covered around 60% of the crater by now. Demos shook his head. Then, the dust we need will increase since the explosion needs to be bigger. However, that may change depending on the nature of the sapling. Can the roots survive without the sapling? Shiro asked. No. Once the core is destroyed, the roots die as well and leave behind withered husks underground. Demos replied as Shiro smiled. Then that's perfect. I was thinking that the roots could act on their own, but if it's like this, it's much easier. All we need is to destroy the core, so the amount of dust we need isn't that much. We just need to make sure it's concentrated around the sapling so that we can focus the explosion. That way, we can limit the damage caused to the surroundings. Shiro said while taking a bite of the bread. After the Dryad's reminder last night, Shiro figured that she should be a little more responsible with how she uses her power. If she could focus and contain the explosion, then not only would it do more damage to the sapling, it will also reduce the damage around them. Even if she doesn't have the threat of having a god wanting to kill her on Earth, she still had to be careful since she could do more damage than any of her enemies. In this scenario, it may be a world-ending sapling and that the destruction of a town is a worthy trade-off. But if she had the power to prevent the town from being destroyed while completing the task, she should. It's only right after all. Plus, it's not like it's extremely hard to accomplish. However, she wouldn't choose to save a town if it meant a decreased success rate, since there's no reason to shoot themselves in the foot if she could avoid it. All right, how are you going to figure out the person who planted this? Shiro asked, as this was another concern. I'm not sure. There are plenty of people who know about the dread sapling, but very few actually venture out into the null area to retrieve one. I'm afraid it's going to be difficult, if not impossible, to find the culprit. Demos shook his head. What about someone with the divinity of hunting? You track prey when hunting, don't you? Just get them to hunt the person down. Shiro suggested, but Demos shook his head. That's a good idea, but the problem is that there's nothing to use as a catalyst for the tracking. The surrounding area of the sapling has already been tread on by multiple people during their last investigation. The culprit's prints have already been masked up. Plus, since we don't know who we're looking for, it's hard to pick out a specific set of tracks. We can only give up on looking for the culprit this time. Hearing this, Shiro sighed, but she understood that they had no choice. Regardless, let's just deal with this sapling then. Shiro shrugged and finished her bread. After talking to Shiro for a little longer, Demos made his way back to the town so that he could investigate the sapling. While he was doing that, Shiro ventured deeper into the forest, remembering the path she took to arrive at the first spot where she found the Dryad. Shiro found herself back at the small clearing that had a large tree next to a small pond. Looking at the roots that acted like a cage for the pond, Shiro glanced around the clearing as this was the spot she felt most powerful, cracking her neck. She swiped out with her hand and caused a small gust of wind with the force that she had exerted. If I had to guess, I'm around 20 to 30% stronger when I'm in this area, she thought to herself and clenched her hand into a fist. I'm surprised that you found yourself back here again. The Dryad's voice rang out again as Shiro turned toward her. Why do you seem to follow me everywhere? Do you not have anything else to do? Shiro asked with a raised eyebrow. Well, I do, but you seem to be rather mysterious, so I figured that I should keep an eye on you. You know, the path to this place is supposed to close itself back up and become a maze of sorts. You actually remembered the correct path, even though it took you more than an hour to reach this spot. I'm impressed. The Dryad chuckled. I have a good memory. Shiro shrugged. So can you tell me more about his place? I don't know why, but in here, I feel much stronger than I do outside. Well, it's a place where nature is heavily concentrated. Do you know why the tree forms a cage around the pond? The Dryad asked while tracing her finger along the surface of the pond. Care to explain? This is liquefied nature essence, or the nutrients that the sapling has been absorbing from the land. To prevent the sapling from growing any faster, I have received some help in condensing some of the nutrients of this land to this pond. I couldn't make this pond any further than this since it's already hard to transport it to this spot. I'm currently waiting for other dryads from the other parts of the section of life so that they can help me either preserve or move this liquefied essence elsewhere so that the sapling can't get it. If we can deal with the sapling, I'll spread this essence back to the land so that it can be used to grow crops once more. However, the sapling had already absorbed quite a bit of the essence before I could condense it, so I'm guessing it'll take a few months for crops to grow again. If the mortals can survive this period, everything will go back to normal. And as for why you feel stronger in this area, is because spirits thrive in areas where there is a large concentration of this. 4. Your wounds healed up quickly because of this pond right here. The dryad explained. And I'm guessing it's the same for strength. Yup. If you want to increase your physical strength in short bursts for combat, I suppose you'll need to learn how to preserve some of this essence inside your body so that it doesn't get used straight away. You can also use this essence to feed yourself. However, let me warn you, every time you try to absorb the essence and use it for combat, you're essentially a smaller dread sapling that's doing the same. While you may not completely drain the land of nutrients, you are still affecting the land. Meaning, if you absorb too much and fight too often, the people will notice a bad harvest when the time arrives. All life in the forest needs nutrients, and you using for combat is akin to steal food from others. It's only natural that some will die of starvation. The dryad reminded with a small smile. Furrowing her brows, Shiro stayed silent. If she was to boost her physical power only slightly, it may cause a bad harvest to the surroundings due to a lack of nutrients. Wait, why would me absorbing some power cause a bad harvest? Surely I can't absorb that much energy now. Shiro tilted her head. First, the conversion from nutrients to power is very bad. Second, young spirits are constantly absorbing this energy so that they can mature and obtain a divinity. So the energy in the land is already being used up. However, they don't use this energy for combat, so the drain isn't bad. But if you were to start absorbing it and using it for combat, then I'm afraid your intake will be equal to more than 100 spirits every few seconds you use this power in combat. The dryad explained. I see, but if I'm feeling strong now, aren't I absorbing the nutrients now? Shiro asked with some concern. You don't need to worry about that. Think of it like an aura that's passively emitted by such a large concentration of nutrients in one place. Normally, you wouldn't feel such a large increase in strength, but since I've concentrated quite a bit of the nutrients in this pond, it's only natural that you'll feel much stronger. The dryad chuckled. So I only feel 20 to 30% stronger thanks to this pong of concentrated energy. If not for this, then the bonus to my strength might not even reach 10%. Hell, I'm not even sure if it'll reach 5%. For such a small bonus, it may cause a bad harvest. It's quite a bad trade-off. Since my base strength is low right now, 5% is basically negligible. Shiro frowned. Never mind then, I guess. She shrugged and sat down. While you cannot get a boost to your strength, it doesn't mean there aren't any other methods. The dryad smiled and leaned over Shiro. Oh, weapons and armors. Tools that help define a hero other than their superhuman strength. Have you heard of Perseus? He used weapons and armors gifted by the gods to slay the monster Medusa. Aside from the weapons and armors, he's basically the same as the other heroes with superhuman strength and agility. The dryad reminded. I know. So are you saying there's a weapon that I can obtain to increase my strength? Shiro asked with a raised eyebrow. Yes and no. It really depends as I'm not too familiar with weapons. However, there is said to be a bough within this forest that has been enchanted by Artemis' power. Its location is hidden, but I know the general area. You can attempt to find the bough if you want. Thinking about it for a moment, Shiro figured that this could be a trap as it seemed too easy. Why are you telling me this? Shiro narrowed her eyes at the dryad. So distrustful. Young spirits are usually rather pure and trusting. The dryad shook her head with a small smile. Well, I'm not the usual young spirit, I suppose. It seems too easy to obtain a weapon that has been blessed by the goddess, so there must be a catch to it. Shiro frowned. Nope, there's no catch. Several people have already tried to obtain the weapon, but they failed. Don't worry, they didn't die. They were just sent out of the forest. As for why I'm telling you, I'm somewhat like a guide. I guide people to the weapon, and if they can obtain it, great. If they can't, then I continue my day without worry. The dryad shrugged, narrowing her eyes at the dryad. Shiro figured that the spirit was being truthful from what she could tell. Fine. Show me the way to the area where the bough is located. Being able to attack the sapling from a distance will be helpful if we do enter combat. Shiro smiled as being near the sapling will kill her. A bough is the perfect weapon for this situation. You seem awfully confident in being able to obtain this bough. The dryad raised her eyebrow. Somewhat. Even if I don't get the bough, I'll probably try to make one myself later. Shiro smiled. While she didn't know how helpful this was, she hoped that the fact that Artemis had given her a blessing could help in this situation. After all, things originating from the same god or goddess usually resonate with one another. If it is truly a bough blessed by Artemis, then her sigil should work. Of course, nothing could happen since she's not able to access her powers, but it's worth a shot. So where is this location? Shiro asked while following behind the dryad. It's deep in the forest. Just follow me, and I'll take you to it. You have my word. The dryad chuckled. Fair enough. If you don't mind, why don't you explain to me more about my dormant sigils while we're walking there? Thinking about it for a moment, the dryad nodded. Sure. You see, sigils, or rather, divinities have two states: the silent state and the active state. There is very rarely a third state, which is the dormant state. The dormant state is something you usually see in demigods and gods due to the fact that they are inherently born with a divinity. For you, you seem to have several dormant sigils, which is very strange because that means you have several divinities in you despite not completing a single trial. The dryad explained. Are there any ways for me to awaken these sigils then? Shiro asked. Unfortunately, no. They awaken in reaction to external factors and are not something you can control. For example, in the Mural of Beginnings, it is stated that one of the demigods awakened his divinity in his most desperate time of need. There were also records of demigods awakening their dormant sigils by just lazing around. The awakening of the sigils isn't something you can trigger at will. The dryad shook her head. But don't worry. Just because you have dormant sigils doesn't mean your slots are taken. She smiled. Slots? Shiro tilted her head at the sudden mention of slots. You don't know about slots? You know how everyone is only allowed 3 divinities, and they have 3 slots to accommodate those divinities. That's what slots are. The dryad explained as Shiro nodded her head. She remembered that her body contains 6 of these slots. 1 slot for a normal divinity and 5 for the primordial ones. If I awaken one of my divinities, would it take one of my slots? Shiro asked as she didn't want to fail this quest because of something she couldn't control. I don't know. Apparently, some of the demigods who had dormant divinities were rather against the idea of taking another god's divinity since it'll be akin to working under them as a servant. The dryad smiled. Why? Isn't it just borrowing their power? Just because you buy some bread from a baker, it doesn't mean you work under the bakers. Shiro tilted her head. Well, sometimes you don't know how gods process things. The dryad chuckled and shrugged her shoulders. They're just petty and annoying in my eyes. Shiro rolled her eyes and shrugged her shoulders. Remembering how Poseidon and Zeus acted, she signed at the state of gods. Hearing no response, Shiro looked up and saw the dryad looking at her with wide eyes that was filled with shock and disbelief. What? Shiro tilted her head. You don't just go around cursing gods like that. They're watching all the time. The dryad looked up at the sky with worry. But they're not in this world, are they? Shiro shrugged and looked up at the sky. Zeus, this one's for you. She called out and flipped her middle finger at the sky. Oh, what are you doing? The dryad panicked and quickly pulled her hand down. What? It's not like he's going to smite me down now, is he? Shiro shrugged. Plus, she doubted that Zeus had the rights to effect her trial in such a manner. Not to mention the fact that he probably couldn't see what was happening since this is under Nyx's control. Young spirits don't know fear. The dryad sighed. I suppose you can summarize it like that. Shiro chuckled softly. Walking for a little longer, Shiro noticed that the plants around them were increasing in size as time passed. It was as if they had been shrunk down. Even a normal flower was now reaching the height of her waist. Sooner or later the flower might even surpass her in height. We're here. The dryad smiled and stood to one side. Looking towards the front of them, Shiro couldn't help but notice that everything looked exactly the same and nothing was out of place. This is the place. Shiro raised her eyebrow. Yup, this, she asked again while pointing in front of them. Yup, the place that looks like we've already walked by it several times now is the place. Shiro forced a smile while trying to pick out anything that may or may not catch her eye. Yup. Care to show me where the entrance to this area is? Like where the entrance to this bow is. Shiro gestured towards the forest in front of them. You're looking at. The dryad smiled. So you're telling me to go find the bow by myself now? Shiro asked while pointing at the forest. Yup. Good luck, the dryad waved with a soft giggle. Disappearing from her spot, Shiro was now alone in the forest. Taking a moment to sigh, she looked around for the tallest tree. With the flowers measuring to her waist, it was only natural that all the trees looked gigantic, and it was rather hard to pick one that seemed like it was the biggest of the bunch. Choosing to find out with easy footholds for her to use while climbing along with vines just in case, Shiro started to scale up the tree with a surprising amount of nimbleness. Flipping her body onto the first branch, she looked up and saw that she still had quite a few branches to go before she reached the top. Jumping up from branch to branch, Shiro found herself back into her normal rhythm. Damn, girls like me shouldn't sit around doing nothing all day. Being active is where it's at. She grinned, feeling much livelier than she had before. Swinging on the second to last branch, she landed a backflip on the tallest branch and looked out towards the forest where the dryad said the bow was located. Narrowing her eyes, she wanted to see if there were any spots that were particularly out of the ordinary. Finding a tree that was sticking out of the crowd of large trees, Shiro figured that it was probably a good place to start with. Just as she was about to jump from the tree, she quickly remembered that she was very vulnerable right now and jumping from this height would heavily injure her if not kill her in an instant. Coughing lightly, she let the adrenaline calm down a little before dashing through the forest. Parkouring from tree to tree, she swung from the vines that hung from the taller branches and managed to arrive at the base of the tallest tree quickly, landing softly on the grass. She raised her eyebrow at the tree and noticed that its width was many times thicker than she was tall. Circling around the tree a little, Shiro started to look for any clues that might lead her to the bow. Artemis was the goddess of the hunt, wilderness, moon, archery, chastity, and childbirth. In this forest, I'll probably need to find clues for hunt, wilderness, moon, and archery in order to locate her bow. Shiro thought to herself, but it was just a guess for now since she didn't know the exact details to obtaining her bow. Spending the next few hours searching around the perimeter, Shiro had a bored expression since she couldn't find any clues. It was like trying to find a needle in a haystack. Taking a break and sitting beneath the largest tree, Shiro started to juggle her weapons since she had nothing else to do right now. Juggling several daggers and a short sword, Shiro wondered why there weren't any hints that if the bow was in this forest around this location, surely there should have been a small clue. Plus, with Artemis' divinity relating to hunt, wilderness, the moon, and archery, she should have found one small clue within her time of searching. Actually, maybe it's not in the forest? Maybe it's above or below. Shiro muttered while catching all of her weapons. Sometimes people like to hide their possessions in places which relates to them, but not in an obvious manner. So an example would be Artemis hiding her bow in a floating rock forming in the sky. Thinking about this point, Shiro quickly dashed to the top of the tallest tree and tried to look around for anything that might be a clue. Looking around the place from the tallest location, she spotted a lake that she had walked past during the few hours she had spent here. She did wonder if the bow was hidden there, so she did a quick dive, but nothing of interest appeared, so she moved on. But there could be some criteria that haven't been met, so she added the location back on her list. The next thing she spotted was the fallen tree leading to a small underground cavern which led to a dead end. Once again, she added that location back on the list since there could be something she was missing. Aside from these two spots, the other locations looked the same, so Shiro shifted her focus. Since her divinity also included the moon, perhaps things will reveal themselves at night. Shiro thought with a smile and decided to investigate the location once more before nightfall. Arriving at the lake, Shiro circled around the perimeter and tried her luck once more, but found nothing. Setting her clothes by the side, she jumped into the lake with her dagger in her mouth and continued to swim towards the bottom. Swimming At impressive speeds for around a minute and a half, Shiro narrowed her eyes at the bottom and figured that if she was to continue down, she wouldn't be able to get back to the surface or she'll drown. Spending a moment to try looking for something that might be of use, Shiro eventually swam back up to the surface and took several deep breaths. On the bottom were only a few boulders and rocks. Nothing really of interest. Strangely enough, there aren't any fishes of animals in this part of the forest. Shiro muttered while climbing out of the lake. Taking a moment to dry her hair and body as best she could, she wore her clothes once more and made her way to the fallen tree leading up to the cavern. Grabbing a few dead tree branches, Shiro created a makeshift torch as the sun was getting a little low. At this point in time, the lighting within the cave would be rather small, so she'll need a light source of her own. Entering the cave with a torch, Shiro noticed that the rocks shimmered lightly at the presence of her torch. Not so much that it formed letters or a pattern, but enough for her to realize that something must be up with the rocks. Thinking about it for a moment, Shiro looked around the cavern and noticed that some of the boulders around the place looked like they could be moved around. Interesting, she muttered with a smile. Placing the torch by the side, she walked up to one of the boulders and gritted her teeth. Trying her best to move it. Shiro could feel a small shift, but not enough so that it would flip over. Letting go of the boulder, she jogged out of the cave and looked for a suitable piece of wood. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to find one that could be used as a lever. Pound carrot and percent and. Don't tell me that you have to be superhuman to actually obtain this bow. Shiro frowned. Crouching near the boulder, Shiro waved her torch around in order to find a spot that she might be able to use as a handle so that she could roll the rock over. However, when she waved the torch near the boulder, she noticed a mirror-like surface that was underneath the boulder. The only reason she noticed this was because the mirror had reflected some of the light from her torch back into her face. Thinking about it for a moment, Shiro checked the other boulders in the cave and saw that they all had the mirror-like surface beneath them. Narrowing her eyes at the boulders, she simulated what their location would be if she was to roll them over and the mirror surface was to be exposed to the light. Tracing the simulated reflection into the cave, Shiro traced her hand along the dead end as this was where the light would focus should all the rocks be turned over. Of course, this was just a single simulation of the position of the rocks. They could very well turn in a different way, and her current simulated end of the light is nothing but a farce. Raising her torch against the wall, she only saw a few shimmers, but nothing happened. Perhaps I need to wait till nightfall to use these boulders. If I was to snap my short sword to pieces, will I be able to recreate the boulder's reflection? Shiro thought to herself, but didn't make a move. After all, if her guess was wrong, she'd be left without a good short sword, which would be quite detrimental. Sitting on one of the boulders, she glanced out of the cavern and wondered to herself for a moment. Hopping off the boulder, she searched around the outer perimeter around the fallen tree and noticed that there were a few smaller boulders that had the same mirror-like surface, but the rocks were rather mossy with shrubbery coating the top of the rock. Moving all of this for it to be set in place seems rather impractical as the outcome would be randomized. Shiro narrowed her eyes. Her instincts were telling her that the key was not moving these boulders, but something else. Memorizing the location of the boulders, Shiro slowly noticed a small pattern and had her suspicions. Estimating where the next spot of the patterns are, she managed to find more boulders and couldn't help but chuckle. Well, I'll be damned. I didn't expect astrology to be a part of this puzzle. I suppose Artemis did say that she was friends with Asteria. Shiro chuckled. The spots of the boulders were precisely the star locations of Orion's constellation, the forbidden love between the marksman Orion and the goddess Artemis. In the end, you had Zeus place him among the constellations. Shiro muttered with a small smile. Understanding that the boulders are not to be moved, Shiro wondered about why they were facing downwards. There was an idea in her mind, but Shiro wasn't too sure since the possibility of such a thing was slim. And so far, she hadn't found any entrances unless, thinking about it for a moment, she turned towards the direction of the lake. I hope I'm right, she muttered. While waiting for night to arrive, Shiro started to find strong pieces of vines, so that if she couldn't find something at the bottom of the lake, she could at least try her best at pulling herself ashore. After spending a few hours collecting the vines, She tied them all up securely. With the sun setting completely, Shiro looked up at the sky and saw a crescent moon hanging above the lake. "Is this a sign, Artemis?" Shiro asked with a soft chuckle. After all, a bow was similar to a crescent moon. Taking off her clothes, she tied the end of her long line of vines against one of the trees. Wrapping the other end on herself, she estimated that this should be enough to reach the bottom of the lake. "I hope my guess is correct," Shiro muttered and took a deep breath. Diving into the lake with nothing but a single bone dagger, Shiro narrowed her eyes and swam towards the bottom. Surprisingly, there was a small flicker of light from the rocks beneath the lake due to the moonlight. Slowly, she noticed the flickers of light traced the image of a bow and arrow ready to be fired towards her left. Turning her body so that she was facing the sky, she saw that the moon was directly above the lake. Chuckling softly, she dived towards the image of the bow and arrow and noticed that the light forming the arrow tip was not actually a reflection from the moon. Instead, it was a sigil that was domed like a boulder. Reaching out for the sigil, Shiro discovered that there was an empty space behind it. Quickly cutting herself free of the vine with her dagger, she dived towards the sigil. Taking a large breath of fresh air, Shiro found herself on a water slide of sorts deeper into the earth. Feeling the cold winds graze her skin, Shiro couldn't help but shiver a little from the cold. "I swear if a spirit who started as a snow girl, get king cold from this, I'm going to be pissed," Shiro muttered in annoyance. After a short while, she braced herself as she could hear the echoes of a large cavern. Looking at the makeshift map she had simulated in her mind, she noticed that she was now beneath the boulder constellations she had found above ground. Seeing the smooth ground, Shiro jumped off the water slide and landed on the stone that in front of her was a single crystal bow that was placed on top of a pedestal made from stone. The bow itself seemed to radiate a soft light as the surrounding stones were lit up by this radiance. Glancing above her, she saw the Orion constellation flicker with a soft light that was similar to stars smiling softly. Shiro walked up to the bow. "Thanks for your help, Artemis." Shiro chuckled and grabbed the bow. Upon touching the bow, several motes of lights appeared around the room. Raising her eyebrows, Shiro glanced at her system interface since it had notified her of a new notification. Claiming Artemis bow, shoot down every target that appears in the room. Each target will stay for 5 seconds. Seeing this, Shiro realized that just getting the bow wasn't enough. She had to prove that she could use the bow. "Well, it ain't too bad. I can handle a few targets," Shiro thought with a smile since she was rather talented with both the bow and the sniper. The only thing with the bow was that she needed to calculate the arrow fall speed as well if the target was far away. Pulling back on the bow string, lights gathered towards her location and formed an arrow, *thuck. Piercing the first target, Shiro pivoted on her foot and shot the second one without too much delay. Memorizing the arrival time of each target, she had made sure that she kept an internal timer on how long they've been around for. As each target only had 5 seconds to be shot down, she needed to be careful of her timing, otherwise she'll fail. After all, she wasn't in her superhuman state right now. She was a normal human, or rather, spirit who knew how to control her body. Shooting down target after target, sweat started to drip down Shiro's body as it reminded her that she was currently nude. The cold wind blowing against her skin served as a distraction, and she couldn't help but feel grateful that no one was watching her right now. If a god happened to be watching and it was a male god, she'd make sure she erased their memories since she didn't want her body to be seen by someone other than the one she wanted to make her partner. *ping. Shooting down the final target that had appeared, Shiro took a deep breath as it felt like her lungs were being set on fire right now. While she was resting, a sigil started to flicker on her wrist. Looking down, she noticed that it was the sigil which belonged to Artemis. Due to the presence of the dormant sigil, Blessing of Artemis, the bow of Artemis has received a small upgrade. This bow does not require arrows. This bow will guarantee a hit, as long as the arrow is within a certain distance from the target. If the user shoots the arrow behind them and expects it to hit the enemy, the arrow will not hit. You have increased affinity with animals and spirits. When you are in a forest, the power of your shots increase. Your bow's power is increased when you are under moonlight. You can store this bow in your sigil, and it will appear by your command. If you find the item, Orion's arrow, new features will be unlocked. Flicking her wrist, Shiro watched as the crystal bow disappeared into her sigil. Raising her eyebrow, she smiled and looked around her. Now then, how the hell am I meant to get out of this place? She muttered. Investigating the cavern, Shiro noticed a sigil on the wall. Putting her hands against the sigil, the entire wall disappeared to reveal a set of stone stairs. Walking up the stone stairs, she found herself in the same cavern where she had first noticed the boulders that had the mirror-like surface underneath them. So it wasn't a dead end, but rather a hidden exit for when a person finishes the test, huh? Shiro said while glancing at the wall that reformed itself. Shrugging her shoulders, she dashed out of the cave and made her way towards the lake. After all, her clothes were left at the lake's side. If she were to lose her clothes, that would be truly awkward, as she'll need to go commando for a while. Thankfully, her clothes were still there with no signs of being touched. Quickly dressing herself, she made her way to the exit of this spot. Dashing through the trees, she was surprised to see the dryad waiting for her with a smile. Congratulations. You have indeed obtained the bow of Artemis. How did you know? Shiro asked curiously. As the guide, it is only natural I know when someone has completed the test. The dryad chuckled. Fair enough. I'll be going back to the town now. Has anything happened in the time I was away? Shiro asked. Not from what I can tell. Your friend did come to look for you, but I told him that you were busy. He wanted to bring you some dinner, and if you're wondering, he is still waiting by the edge of the forest. The dryad smiled. I see. Thank you for telling me about this bow, by the way. It'll be a great help to me. Shiro grinned. It's my pleasure. Dashing through the trees, Shiro arrived at the edge of the forest rather quickly. Seeing Demos sitting by one of the trees with a basket in hand, Shiro couldn't help but chuckle. Sorry, I was getting something. Did you wait long? Shiro asked, as she landed next to him. Don't worry. Are you hungry? I've brought some more food from the town. Demos replied while opening the basket. It's not exactly the best food, but it'll do. Most of the people in this section of life don't eat meat, since it's rather dangerous to hunt. So while we're here, you might have to get used to no meat for a while unless some merchants from other sections happen to pass by one of the towns. Demos chuckled. That's fine. Honestly, I've had worse, I suppose. Shiro shrugged and ate the bread. So what were you busy with? Demos asked curiously. With this. Flicking her wrist, Shiro summoned the bow into her hand. Seeing the bow, Demos widened his eyes. Thanks to his divinity of wisdom, he immediately realized that this was the bow of Artemis. Wait, you obtained a weapon blessed by the gods? Demos asked with disbelief. Doesn't that require some luck and knowledge on the god or goddess along with skills that match the weapon? Since Artemis is the goddess of the hunt, her test for the bow is probably something that even experienced hunters struggle with. It was somewhat difficult, Shiro admitted, since she had almost failed halfway through the test. There were simply too many targets, and she barely managed to hit the last one in time. If she missed, she would have failed the test. Hearing Shiro describe a god's test as somewhat difficult, Demo's smile started to twitch. I thought you were proficient with daggers and short swords. When did you become proficient with the bow? Demos asked. I never said I was proficient with the daggers and short swords. You assumed that I was, since they were the only weapons I could get my hands on at the time. I'm good with all forms of weaponry since I have some experience with them. Staffs, spears, halberds, long swords, short swords, daggers, bows, and so on. And if it's a custom weapon, then give me a day or so. I'll get used to it quickly. Shiro smiled and dismissed the bow. Hearing that Shiro was proficient with quite a few weapons, Demos just accepted the fact that she could do it. His divinity of wisdom told him that any further thought on the matter would be harmful for his mental state. After talking for a little while, Shiro brought up the subject of the dread sapling. So how far is it into stage 2? Shiro asked. I'd say it's roughly a third of the way, in, which is good for us, since it means that there is a small chance of it reaching stage 3. Demos replied. I see. Have you called for reinforcements? Yes, I have. They'll be arriving in roughly a week if they're fast. Demos replied. Do you think it'll reach stage 3 by that time? Maybe. It'll definitely reach the halfway point, that's for sure. As for whether or not it'll reach stage 3, we can only hope that it doesn't. Demos shook his head. Furrowing her brows, Shiro wasn't exactly excited by the thought that they were going to leave it alone for another week. During this week, there was a chance that it could discover the liquefied essence, and should it reach that stage, it'll most definitely reach stage 3. Once that happens, the reinforcements that Demos called for wouldn't be enough. Dryad, is there a way for us to slow down its growth? Shiro asked. Yes, but it's rather difficult. You'll need to cut its roots so that it can expand outwards. That'll force it to use some of the stored nutrients to heal itself. But that might agitate it and force combat. The Dryad replied. I see. All right, we'll keep that as a backup in case things get out of hand. Shiro sighed. For the next few days, Demos kept his eye on the dread sapling's progress while Shiro and the Dryads searched underground for some of its roots so that they could also keep a track on its progress. During this time, a few of the reinforcements that Demos had called over arrived surprisingly early, and they included people that have completed at least one divinity. A few of them already had 2 completed. The strongest warrior that he had invited was called Lena, and she had completed 2 of the strongest divinities available. Divinity of War obtained from the Tower of Ares, and the Divinity of Weapons obtained from the Tower of Perseus. She was a delicate-looking woman similar to Shiro, as her stature was a little small. However, despite her small stature, her muscles were brimming with power. Each swing of her sword could cleave a portion of the land apart. Lena had long black hair and a set of menacing crimson eyes that seemed to radiate with malice. Wearing a set of silver armor that was finely carved with small details such as wings on the plate. Watching from the top of the crater, Shiro was extremely impressed with her utilization of Perseus' divinity. It was similar to her when she would create and disassemble weapons in the midst of combat to give herself the upper hand. When the enemy is a bit too far from her, she would switch her weapon to a spear for that extra reach. And if they close the gap in order to take advantage of the spear's weakness, she'll switch to either a dagger of a short sword. Normally, Shiro would have wanted to fight against someone like her seriously, as their fighting style was rather similar, but unfortunately, she was too weak right now, and the moment she tried to fight against her seriously, she'd get her ass kicked in the end. Thinking about it for a moment, Shiro figured that she can probably ask for a small spar with her. Bow. However, due to the fact that she was resting in the town, Shiro couldn't meet her. The moment she entered the town, she would begin to breathe in the corruption emitted by the dread sapling, and that was not what she wanted. In the end, she had Demos send a message to Lena for her. Waiting at the top of the crater, she saw the black-haired woman approach with an angry glare. However, Shiro couldn't detect any malice in her, which was extremely strange. You called for me? She asked while standing in front of Shiro. Yup. I was just wondering if we can have a quick spar or something along those lines. I don't have any divinities, but after seeing your fighting style, I couldn't help but want to practice with you. If you don't mind, of course. Shiro smiled. Even though Lena was glaring at her, there wasn't any true anger in her eyes, so Shiro dismissed it for now. Of course, once Shiro detected anger, then she won't be as courteous. Are you sure? Normally people don't want to spar with me since my fighting style is annoying to go against. Lena asked with slight traces of confusion. Don't worry. I won't complain, as it is something I requested. However, due to some special circumstances, I cannot enter the town. If you don't mind, we'll be fighting around here. I'll also try not to damage the forest. Shiro chuckled. Sure, what weapon do you use? Lena asked with a nod. I use the bow, daggers, and a short sword. Shiro smiled while patting her belt of weapons on her waist. Where's your bow? Here. Flicking her wrist, Shiro summoned Artemis. Bow. Surprised at the fact that Shiro had a bow blessed by the gods, Lena couldn't help but nod her head in appreciation. How should we do this? One-hit victory, or do you want to do more than just one hit? Lena asked. They didn't need to worry about their injuries since there was someone with the divinity of healing received from the Tower of Asclepius. Any minor wound they receive will be healed instantly. Let's go with 3 hits. Shiro suggested as Lena nodded her head. Making some distance between them, Shiro stretched her body lightly and brought out her bows. They weren't allowed to go into the forest. Her possibilities with the bow were a little restrained, but she wasn't too worried since her close-quarters combat was decent as well, especially since she had received some training from her parents. However, she could not deny the obvious physical difference between her and Lena, so she had to be careful. Since people discover their potential, the more danger they were in. This was a good chance for Shiro to improve due to her lack of power at this moment. I'll let you take the first attack, Lena said while summoning a spear. Entering a stance, her fighting aura caused Shiro to grin. Similar to when she was fighting against a Turka when she was extremely malnourished, a single bad move could end things for her. Show me what you got, Shiro thought, and pulled back on her bowstring, summoning an arrow. Shiro fired without hesitation and dashed towards Lena straight away. Surprised at the fact that Shiro immediately gave up her ranged advantage, Lena parried the arrow to the side with her spear and wanted to switch to the long sword. However, the power of the arrow was much bigger than what she had expected from a person without divinity. This gap in her defenses was exactly what Shiro was looking for. Grabbing a dagger, she lunged towards Lena, quickly summoning her sword. Lena wanted to parry Shiro's dagger, but before her sword could block the dagger, Shiro retracted her hand. Pivoting on her right foot, Shiro brought both of Lena's arms down, with her left leg breaking open her guard in the process. Shocked by this sudden movement, Lena made eye contact with Shiro and couldn't help but feel a shiver down her spine. Trusting her instincts, she summoned a shield from her armory. Asterisk clank. Blocking a dagger strike just in time, Lena dismissed the shield and reached out to Shiro, grabbing her ankles. Lena spun her body and flung Shiro into the air. Summoning a spear, Lena threw it towards her shoulder with a moderate amount of power. Not enough so that it'll completely tear her arm off, but just enough so that it'll penetrate into her flesh, using the body of her bow to block the spear. Shiro gritted her teeth from the force that was transmitted through her body. However, she did indeed succeed in blocking the attack. Quickly grabbing the spear, Shiro landed on the ground. I'll take it back now. Lena summoned the spear next. To her, I'm surprised. You were able to keep up despite not having a single divinity. She smiled softly, but when paired with her glare, it looked as though she was mocking her opponent even though Shiro knew otherwise. I'll be honest, I was sure that my dagger would have struck you. Your reactions are impressive. Shiro chuckled. She had made sure to completely divert Lena's attention before her strike so that the dagger would hit, but even after diverting her attention, the moment Lena felt danger, she was able to summon a shield just in time. Should we continue? Lena asked with a smile. Of course. Continuing their spar for a little longer, it took longer than what Lena had expected to determine a winner since Shiro was able to barely dodge some of her attacks. However, in the end, the difference in physical prowess was what allowed Lena to obtain victory. Thank you. I was able to learn a lot from this spar. May I know your name? Lena asked. It's Shiro. You want to spar some more occasionally while we wait for everyone else to arrive? Shiro offered. That would be great. Lena nodded her head enthusiastically. So just a question from me, but what's up with your glare? I couldn't detect anger from you, so I know you're not always angry. Shiro asked as she was rather curious about her glare. Well, it's something that I've grown up with. My mom also has this glare, but my brother doesn't, so I'm guessing it's something that is common with the females in my family. Lena explained while scratching her hair. Oh, I see. It must have been tough then. Shiro nodded her head. I've gotten used to it now, and so have the people around me. Lena chuckled. Hearing this, Shiro was happy for Lena. The two would spar occasionally in the following days while more and more warriors arrived at the town. Soon, everyone was here, and it was time to deal with the dread sapling. In the time that the remaining warriors had arrived, Shiro had asked the warrior with a wind divinity to shred up some trees, which he wasn't too bothered by since they were waiting around doing nothing for a few days. Just to be safe, Shiro had asked the dryad for any trees that she could cut down. While she was a little sad that a few trees were going to die for this operation, it was okay since having the dread sapling survive was much worse than cutting down a few trees. With the dryad's permission, Shiro had the warrior shred up enough trees so that they could completely surround the tree with wood dust. Explaining the plan to the warriors along with a small demonstration, they were okay with opening the fight with the dust explosion so that they didn't harm their allies. After all, if they were to attempt this during the fight, it'll be akin to throwing a bomb into a crowd of allies. ####. Looking down from the top of the crater, Shiro watched as they set the boxes of wood dust around the tree. Once all the boxes had been set up, the warriors started to back off, while two stayed behind. One was a person with the divinity of wind, while the other owned the divinity of fire granted by Apollo. Waving his hand, a gust of wind appeared in the area as all of the sawdust was sent into the air. Controlling the current so that the dust revolved around the tree, the man glanced towards his partner and nodded his head. With the signal, the second warrior summoned a sigil into the air as the sun's heat seemed to intensify. While this was happening, Lena glanced towards Shiro and Demos. "Do you think this'll work?" she asked curiously. She was positioned here as her divinity allowed her to fight at any range, as Shiro was within the perimeter of the dread saplings. Influence. One of the roots could appear here, so she was here as a guard along with ranged support. There's a high chance that it won't, and the most it'll do is reveal the dread sapling, but who knows? Since they're igniting it with flames created from divinity, it means that the subsequent explosion should also be enchanted to some extent, which should help. Shiro shrugged. Huh. Seeing as though the one who suggested the operation wasn't confident about its power, Lena paused before accepting it. After all, they couldn't see the future, so whether or not the dust explosion would work is still a mystery. Now, don't be like that, Shiro. Have some faith. Demos chuckled. I suppose I should have some faith. However, Shiro stood up and summoned her bow. You probably shouldn't hope for the impossible, such as killing the sapling in one go with some dust and fire. Pulling back on her bowstring, Shiro narrowed her eyes at the tree in the center and waited patiently for the dust explosion to happen before attacking the tree. Seeing this, Lena did the same and summoned a bow from her armory. After a short moment, the warrior with Apollo's divinity finished his preparation. If one was to look up into the sky, they would see a giant arrow made from fire in the distance. Should it come any closer, the heat would be rather unbearable. Making sure that everyone was a good distance away, the warrior swiped his hands down. Receiving the command, the arrow started to fall as the sky was slowly tainted with a red hue formed by the arrow increasing its speed. Bracing herself for the impact, Shiro kept her eye on the tree. *TSSS. Bang! The moment the arrow came into contact with the dust, sparks jumped from one particle to another as a giant column of fire shot up into the sky. With the blazing column of fire in the center of the crater, a shockwave of dust exploded outwards. Despite having braced herself for the impact, Shiro was still knocked back a few feet. Clicking her tongue, she quickly stabilized herself and walked to the edge of the crater. *KRRRR. Feeling the ground shake, she understood that the fight was about to begin and the sapling was far from happy. Rumble. Crack. Suddenly, tens of fissures started to appear around the town as black roots started to appear. Seeing this, all of the warriors inside the crater brought out their weapons and charged towards the tree in the center. As long as they kill the core, the roots will naturally disappear. With a third of them focusing on the tree and the others blocking the roots, they were well organized in delegating the tasks to one another. As for Shiro and Lena, they were rather relaxed while shooting some of the roots from a distance, as none of the fissures had opened up near them. Without the threat of the roots, they didn't need to worry too much about defense. However, Shiro couldn't help but feel as though something was wrong. My instincts are usually correct. Plus, it's taking them a while to kill this thing. With their efficiency, they should have killed it already. Shiro thought with a frown. Shiro. Hearing her name being called, Shiro turned around and saw a panicked dryad. F***. What happened? Shiro asked with a frown. The dread sapling pant. It's a fake. It's a decoy that the real one has made. The real one was hiding deep underground and used this as a proxy. After everyone attacked it, it appeared in the forest. I'm trying to keep it at bay, but it's looking for the liquefied essence right now, the dryad explained as she was trying to catch her breath. Damn it. No wonder they're taking a while to kill that thing. Sir, get a few of the warriors to come into the forest so that they can provide backup. Lena, come with me, and we'll keep the dread sapling at bay before it can find the source. Shiro commanded with a frown. Since Lena understood what kind of danger the dread sapling could bring, having the real body escape would be a problem. Nodding her head, she immediately dismissed her bow and summoned the sword as for Demos. He had already started to run towards the warriors that were being preoccupied by the roots. Dryad, show us the way, Shiro said as the three of them dashed into the forest. I will. However, If you go close to it, it'll poison you. The dryad frowned. I've got a bow for a reason. Just tell me where it is, and I'll try to provide some ranged support without getting poisoned. If you are really worried, make me the biggest tree you can so that I can hit the sapling from a high location. Shiro frowned while dashed past a few trees. Lena was next to her as she slowed down just a little so that she could hear more about what the dryad wanted to say. All right, I can't get close to it either, but I can fight it from afar using my own divinity. I'll lead your friend here to sapling while I make you a tree. The dryad nodded. Keep an eye out on the other warriors as well. They'll be coming for reinforcement, so it'll be good if you can show them the way. It'll be tough for Lena to keep the sapling occupied all by herself. Shiro narrowed her eyes and jumped up onto a branch. Using it as a vault, she jumped into the sky as the trees beneath her feet started to grow larger with each passing second. Acting as a staircase, Shiro estimated that the tree she was currently on was around 130 meters from ground level. Narrowing her eyes, she could see slithers of black roots slithering through the forest as decay was spreading. Remembering the location of the liquefied essence, Shiro guessed that the sapling will find it soon if they don't keep it occupied. Dryad, are you there? Shiro asked while firing a few arrows at the roots that she could see, pinning them against the ground for a few moments. Yes, move the liquefied essence if you can. It's quite close to where the sapling is right now, Shiro said with a frown. I'll try. The dryad nodded before disappearing. Looking down, Shiro could see Lena dashed with a sword in hand. She should be able to keep it busy for a little while if I provide some ranged support. Shiro thought to herself and took a deep breath. Pulling back on her bow, she fired a few more arrows. Hopping over some fallen trees. Lena started to notice signs of decay and withering. Understanding that this meant the sapling is near, she increased her speed. Crack. Hearing the ground crack beside her, she quickly pivoted on her foot and slashed with her sword, cutting the root in half before it could even approach her. There were a few roots that tried to attack her from behind when she swung her sword, but arrows pinned them against the ground before they could even lash out. Glancing towards the tall tree in the distance, Lena waved her hand lightly as appreciation before dashing forwards once more. Soon, she came face to face with the dread sapling. Without a host, the dread sapling was completely exposed to Lena. It was a fleshy bulb-like object with veins pulsing through its body. A black flower bloomed above the bulb as red tentacles writhed around within the flower, which made it look like a nest of bloodied maggots. The bulb was around the size of a human torso, but the extensions from this bulb were far from small, connected by a thick trunk. Black roots could be seen digging into the ground as each individual hair on the root would grow with each passing second and also dig into the ground. Sensing the arrival of Lena, the ground around the sapling started to split apart as hundreds of roots shot towards her in an attempt to kill her. Glaring at the wall of roots that wanted to end her, Lena summoned a shield into her spare hand and swiped with her sword while using the shield as cover. Bang. Feeling the brunt force of hundreds of roots crashing against her shield, Lena gritted her teeth and tried to stand her ground. However, the force still pushed her back by several meters. Before the roots could attack again, a hail of arrows appeared in the air and started to rain down around the main body. Creating a dome using its roots to protect itself, the sapling seemed agitated by the interference of the two. Seeing the sapling shield itself against her hail of arrows, Shiro clicked her tongue. It's almost at stage 3, but not quite. However, despite not having reached stage 3, it can still use roots to protect itself. Since it had quite a bit of time to mature, the amount of roots that it has must be in the thousands now. It'll definitely be a pain to try to destroy them all without a plan. But if the roots are around, it'll be rather tough to target its main body, Shiro thought with a frown. However, she did not stop shooting her arrows since it gave Lena more chances to attack the sapling. Glancing back towards the town, she could see 1 or 2 warriors that were being led into the forest with the help of the dryad, but it wasn't enough, as she'd need at least a third of all the warriors in the town in order for them to kill the sapling. Any less would make the fight much harder than what it needs to be. Thankfully, Lena looked like she was able to hold her own for a long time, but since she was in a constant state of defense, it was hard to attack the sapling. For every root that she cut down, more would take their place. That to make matters worse. Since Shiro's weapon was a bow right now, it wasn't as effective as a sword when it comes to taking down roots. Due to her initial rain of arrows, the sapling now had a constant shield of roots around the bulb. All of the arrows that Shiro shot would be stopped by this wall. Since she couldn't kill the sapling even with Lena's help, the most they could do was to delay it from finding the liquefied essence. After a few more rounds of arrows, Shiro noticed the withering of the forest slowly traveling towards her and knew that the roots were going to reach her sooner or later. Once they do, it'd be hard for her to escape the poisoning. That on a good note, however, more warriors were able to arrive in the forest to help Lena fend against the sapling, and they had managed to get a few good hits on the bulb, which caused black sap to seep into the ground, which seemed to have increased the withering of the surroundings. Seeing this, Shiro realized that this dread sapling was a little different from what Deimos had described. Not only was it smart enough to create a proxy so that it could fool people, but it was also able to corrode the surroundings at a much faster pace. However, the most that they could do right now was to try their best at killing this sapling. Time passed slowly as most of the warriors were now fighting the real body. Despite their onslaught, the sapling seemed to be more interested in withering the forest than it was at defending itself. Due to the amount of decay that was spreading, Shiro had to retreat from the battle, as not even the tall tree was safe from the decay. If she had stayed, she would have inhaled quite a few mouthfuls of poison. Watching the battle from afar, Shiro had a serious expression on her face. Deimos was next to her, as his specialty didn't lie in fighting. "What do you think it's planning?" Deimos asked with a serious expression. "Pardon?" Shiro turned to him, not expecting him to ask her this question. Normally, with something like the dread sapling, it'll try its best to preserve its life and escape from harm. However, this one seems to be more focused on discovering or perhaps finding something. Deimos said with a frown. "Well, you think it's the pool of essence behind us?" Shiro asked while gesturing to the pool. "Maybe, but it doesn't look like it to me. It seems like it's trying to spread its decay as far as possible." Deimos shook his head, staying silent. Shiro wondered if it was looking for something else other than the liquefied essence. Before she could finish her train of thought, a giant earthquake shook the ground beneath them, throwing them off balance. "What the hell?" Shiro clicked her tongue while stabilizing herself. Looking at the giant cloud of dust in the distance where the fight was going on, Shiro understood that the sapling must have done something. "Dry it. Make me another tall tree," Shiro commanded, since she needed to see what was going on without killing herself. Without delay, the tree next to Shiro started to grow as she quickly jumped onto the branch. After a short moment, she was now looking over the entire forest. Focusing her attention to where the explosion was, Shiro widened her eyes at the explosion. The entire area that the sapling caused to decay had collapsed into the ground, forming a second crater as black goo could be seen seeping from the side of the crater. However, her main concern wasn't the fact that the sapling could no longer be found, but the black roots were still around, and they seemed to be threading themselves through the crumbled debris, forming a net of sorts while the black goo slowly filled the crater. "Dry it. Get the remaining warriors to help with evacuation," Shiro shouted out, since she could see several injured people trying their best to climb out of the crater. Thankfully, after the earthquake, the remaining roots in the town ceased to function, which allowed the remaining warriors to run into the forest and help their comrades. Looking at the destruction caused, Shiro furrowed her brows and looked for Lena. Seeing the woman laying down on the ground with a slightly pained face and a set of broken armor, Shiro kneeled next to her. "What happened?" Shiro asked with a frown. "I don't know. When the earthquake happened, I saw the sapling shrink itself while spewing out more black goo. It dug into the ground and escaped," Lena replied as her voice was weak. Looking around at their casualties, Shiro couldn't help but click her tongue. "Seems like it's not an average dread sapling. The dread saplings I know can't do tasks like this." Deimos frowned. With the disappearance of the dread sapling, the toxin in the town seemed to have lessened, but it still wasn't good for Shiro to enter for a long period of time. After all of the warriors were taken to one of the inns so that they could be healed, Shiro made her way back to the forest and checked the damage. The good news was that the flow of black goo had stopped. The bad news was that there is now a lake of mysterious black liquid in the middle of the forest that was formed by the dread sapling. To make matters worse, The toxicity of the lake was much higher than what the town was. If Shiro were to enter its premises and take a single breath of air, she would immediately die. Looking at the black lake, Shiro could see black and purple particles leaking into the air before fading away. The surroundings of this crater was now completely filled with decay, and the dryad had to try her best at cutting off the area so that it didn't pollute the rest of the forest. The result of their battle against the dread sapling was a complete loss. I've finally managed to somewhat isolate the lake. The dryad sighed while appearing next to Shiro. What about the liquefied essence? What will you do with that? Shiro asked, since the town is still somewhat polluted, even if I was to return the essence back to the town, it'd only get eaten away by the corruption. Plus, with the lake nearby, it'll be dangerous to return the essence back to the land, especially since we don't know what it does. The dryad frowned. Well, we know one thing, and that is that it's highly toxic to spirits. If we so much as approach it, we'll die. Shiro sighed. Indeed. Thankfully, it doesn't seem to be spreading, but we can't be sure about what its use is. The best course of action is probably to give up on this area and evacuate the people in the town first, then monitor this after. The dryad suggested. It's probably best to look for people with the talents of Demos so that they can accurately determine what is wrong with the lake. Shiro narrowed her eyes before turning towards the city. In the meantime, I need to make my way to the section of sky so that I can get my first divinity. She muttered as she was rather idle during the last fight. If she had a divinity, she could have increased their chances of victory and potentially killed the dread sapling before it escaped. Shaking her head, Shiro made her way to the town. She was going to ask Demos about going to the section of sky right now. If he can't, then she'll have to go on her own. Now that her body is entirely healed and she had Artemis bow, traveling across the world to the section of sky shouldn't be too hard. Dashing through the forest, Shiro saw Demos talking with Lena. Yo, what are you two talking about? Shiro asked, curiously. Oh, it's nothing much. Just talking about having some people stationed around here to monitor the lake for any suspicious activities. Since Lena has quite a few connections around the world, she'll be able to ask for help. Demos replied with a smile. I see. The dryad said that we should probably evacuate the townsfolk to another place while we can sense there is a slim possibility that the lake could expand. Hearing this, Demos furrowed his brows. That is indeed a possibility, but it's rather difficult to move this many people to another place. Plus, there is a severe lack of food, so the journey is going to be difficult. Plus, the closer we get to the center, the more dangerous it is for us to hunt for food. The only choice left is for them to go to the section of night, but unless they find a big town, they're still going to struggle for food. It'll tough, but if we try our best, I think we can pull through with everyone surviving through this ordeal. Demos smiled. That's good, but I need to talk to you about something else. Remember at the start when I said I'll become your assistant in return for you to help me get to the section of sky? I think I might need to part ways with you here. With how I am currently, it shouldn't be too hard for me to travel to the section of sky. Shiro said while looking down at her hands. All right. If we go back to the section of night, it'll take much longer for you to reach the section of sky. You still need to find the tower and complete it too. Demos paused for a moment before nodding. Okay, I'll go get a few maps for you so that it'll be easier for you. It'll tell you how to get to the section of sky along with where the Tower of Nike is located. If you make your way to the next town, I can have them deliver it to you through a messenger. How will they know it's me though? Shiro raised her eyebrows. You'll get a token of sorts since this service is created through divinity. All you need to do is keep that token on you since the messenger tracks you using that token. Once the service is complete, the token disappears. Demos chuckled. Oh, how do you do that? Can you show me? Shiro asked, as this would be handy to use in the future. It's not hard, but we'll need to go into town, and I doubt you want that. Demos glanced at the town awkwardly. Don't worry though, you'll find out how to do it in the next town easily. When you collect the maps from the messenger, just ask him to teach you and he'll do it for free since it means more business for him. How would I pay? Shiro asked. You'll need pay by sending the money when you make the request so that they know you are not pulling wool over their eyes. They're trustworthy, so it's okay. After talking to Demos for a little longer, Shiro was told to wait here for a moment while Demos ordered the 2 maps for her. Waiting for around 20 minutes or so, she saw Demos in the distance. I've done it for you. Keep this token on you, and when you're in the next town, the messenger will give you the 2 maps. I'll give you this map for now so that you don't lose your way to the next town as you're not familiar." Demos smiled, handing her a map and a bronze token that had 2 wings carved on both the front and back. "Thank you. How much did you have to pay for the maps?" Shiro asked. "No need to pay me for them. Think of it as a farewell gift." Demos chuckled. "Are you sure?" Shiro raised her eyebrow. "Yes, I'm sure. When are you going to leave for the next town?" "Probably now. I need to get to the section of sky as soon as possible." Shiro shrugged. "I see. Well, in that case, then I wish you luck. It's only been a short while, but I've enjoyed having you help me with my lessons." Demos smiled. "Amen. It's been fun for me too. Stay safe out there, okay?" Shiro nodded her head and gave him a small wave. Looking at the map, Shiro memorized everything and started to walk towards the direction of the next town. Since there weren't too many obstacles on the way there, Shiro figured that she could probably walk in a straight line and arrive within a week or so. Normally, if one was to follow the road, they would need to take a winding path which would extend the time it took, but it would be a safe path. On the other hand, if she was to take the path through the forest, she could hunt and get some food. However, the moment she thought of this point, Shiro paused in her footsteps. Due to the fact that they were in the section of life, she could not kill the monsters as most of them were harmless. If she did, the forest would try to kill her. "Dryad," Shiro called out. "Hello." Seeing the Dryad appear next to the tree, Shiro turned towards her. "Do you happen to know what I can eat on the way to the next town? I can't exactly hunt the monsters in this place, so is there something that I can eat in the forest?" Shiro asked with a forced smile. "There is, but it's mostly plants and I doubt it'll be enough for you." "Thankfully for you. Since we're on the outskirts of the section of life, the influence of the tower isn't that strong, so I can bless you with a pardon. It allows you to hunt one monster every 2 days, so you'll need to be careful of which monster you hunt. This pardon will lose effectiveness the closer you are to the center, so you'll need to be careful." The Dryad smiled. Since Shiro tried her best in resolving the problem about the dread sapling, even though it didn't go as planned, the Dryad wasn't against giving her some help. Closing her eyes, the Dryad raised her hand and drew a sigil in the air, shattering into dust. Shiro watched as this dust wrapped around her before flickering away. This gives you the same benefits as the monsters in the forest, so you can hunt without worry. But remember, 1 monster per 2 days, or else you will be attacked by the forest. The Dryad cautioned as Shiro nodded her head. "Thank you for your help." "No problem, young spirit. I wish you luck on your journey." The Dryad chuckled. With the final problem out of the way, Shiro made her way towards the next town. There were some small problems on her journey, such as not being able to kill a monster due to the fact that she had already killed something else. But she was able to push through and travel through the different forests that she passed on her way there. After a week of travel, she could finally see the town in the distance. Looking down at her map to make sure that she was at the right place, Shiro's smile couldn't help but twitch slightly at the statue she could see in the center of the village. Despite her distance, the statue still looked huge from her perspective. "Why the hell does this town have a massive statue of this C***T? Shiro muttered as the statue depicted the leader of gods, Zeus. Sighing softly, she was grateful to the fact that this was just a temporary stop, as she was only here to collect 2 other maps. If she had to stay here for longer and look at the statue of Zeus every day, she'd want to smash it down herself. Arriving at the town, Shiro decided to look for an inn first since she didn't know when the messenger would arrive. Since they would track her token, she didn't need to worry about anything. Asking around a little for a place where she could stay for the night, Shiro was sad to find out that the only place that was open was called Lightning Tavern, and everything inside was Zeus-themed, such as the food. For example, Lightning God's Banquet. Just looking at the names caused Shiro to cringe and dissuade her from purchasing food from this place. Surprisingly, they had some imported meat from the other sections, but each dish was expensive to the point that she could buy a decent weapon with the amount. I have 25 silver and 300 copper on me after everything I've done. A decent weapon that most soldiers would use costs around 5 to 10 silver, while a dish with meat costs just as much. A night will cost me 25 copper, so it's not too bad, Shiro thought to herself while glancing down at her coin purse. Pausing for a slight moment, Shiro decided to bite the dust and have a decent meal for tonight. It wasn't as if she was going to stay for multiple nights, so a decent meal would be a good change. Plus, with her having to ration the meat that she hunts so that she could keep herself fed on the way here, Shiro was feeling quite hungry. Walking up to the bar maiden, Shiro tried her best to ignore the paintings of Zeus in the background. "Excuse me, can I get a room for the night and the warrior's feast?" Shiro asked as the bar maiden turned towards her, seeing a rather young-looking girl order such an expensive meal. The bar maiden couldn't help but raise her eyebrow. You do know that the warrior's feast costs 8 silvers, right?" She cautioned quietly with a worried expression. After all, she was a young girl with only a short sword. Seeing as how she ordered such an expensive meal, it means that she had some money on her, and some of the more bandit-like folk might want to rob the poor girl. "Yes, that's fine. I can pay for it." Shiro nodded with a smile. Seeing her confidence, the bar maiden wondered if she had a few divinities, but it wasn't her responsibility to inquire about such details. Nodding her head, the bar maiden noted it down before looking up. "Would you like me to bring the meal up to your room, or would you like to dine here?" "Personally, I suggest dining in your room as I can hide what you ordered so that the people don't think about robbing you." She whispered the last part over. As Shiro thought for a moment, "Can you bring it to my room then?" Shiro smiled. "Of course. That'll be 8 silver and 25 coppers. Try to hide the coins when you pass it over so that they can't see it." Hearing this, Shiro nodded with a small chuckle. "Kind girl," she thought while sliding over 8 silvers carefully so that others couldn't see it. Once she handed over all of the money, she was given a key by the bar maiden. "Your room on the 3rd floor, second door to the left. There is a bar where you can order drinks if you want. Your food will be ready in 30 minutes. If you desire other services, which I doubt, you can tell me, and I'll notify the staff." The bar maiden smiled as Shiro nodded her head. Glancing towards the bar, Shiro thought about something for a moment before turning to the bar maiden. "So my alcohol tolerance is very high, and I was just wondering if you have anything made by someone with the divinity of wine received from the Tower of Dionysus." She asked as she was curious as to what being drunk felt like. After all, she had never gotten drunk regardless of how much she drank, and the fact that there are people in the world with a blessing from the god of wine interested her greatly. "Unfortunately, we don't. Something made by a person with the divinity of wine wouldn't be sold out here. You'll find them in large cities, and the prices are rather steep since the wine is rumored to be unforgettable once you get a sip." The bar maiden chuckled. "I see. Well, I'll be in my room then." Shiro nodded. While it was a shame that there wasn't any wine like that in this inn, Shiro could find a chance for good wine at another time. Walking up the wooden staircase, Shiro found her room and inserted the key. Hearing the slightly rusty lock, Shiro couldn't help but sigh at the poor security. Though I suppose it's also good considering the fact that if anyone was to try to break in sneakily, I'll hear the rusty locks. She thought about the silver lining before checking out the room. The room itself was rather small, and all it had was a small wooden desk, a wooden chair, and a single bed. On the table was a half-used candle with a tinderbox placed next to it. Lighting the fire up, Shiro opened the windows slightly so that a gentle wind blew into her room. Taking off her jacket, she folded it neatly and placed it on the chair. Removing her weapon belt, she laid herself on the bed and frowned slightly. The bed isn't bad, but it's not exactly the best either. I suppose it's better than a tree branch, though." She mused to herself while closing her eyes to rest for a moment. Before the food arrived, after a short rest, she heard a knocking on her door. Opening the door, she saw the same bar maiden with a tray that was covered by a domed wooden lid. "I'll place your food on the table. Once you have finished, call for me, and I'll take it back to the kitchen." The bar maiden smiled while taking the wooden lid off. "Okay." Nodding her head, Shiro watched as she left her room. The meal itself wasn't bad, but it was a little bland. Due to the expensiveness of salt, it was only to be expected that a rural town like this would struggle for such luxuries. Understanding that the larger cities would have salt, Shiro couldn't wait to taste some proper food. However, there was also the concern about whether or not she could afford such a meal, and the only answer she had for that was mercenary work after she obtained her first divinity. Shaking her head, she brought the empty plates downstairs, glancing around for a moment. She decided to have a drink just to have a taste of the wine from the Forgotten Realm. After paying 50 coppers for a decent cup of wine, Shiro sat down on an empty table and enjoyed her drink. Taking a sip, Shiro raised her eyebrows since the wine wasn't too bad. Compared to the modern wine that she had tasted before, the sweet taste of fruits was much stronger in this one, and it was quite enjoyable. After finishing the drink, Shiro returned to her room and rested up for the night. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. Are you sure this is the room of that girl? Yes, I'm sure. Did you not see how much silver she handed over to the lady? She's filthy rich, I tell you. Do you think she's the daughter of a rich family from the city? Obviously not. Why would she come to this town? Then, just trust me. In and out, 2-minute job. Be quiet, or else she might wake up. Hearing the sound of whispers, Shiro slowly opened her eyes with a sigh. I guess I might need to do some cleanup. Hopefully not if they're smart. She thought to herself and carefully sat up. Asterisk and yawning loudly on purpose, Shiro could faintly hear the two scurrying away for a moment, but they seemed to have hidden themselves around a corner. Well, they're insistent on taking my money. Unfortunate for them, I suppose. Dressing herself, she grabbed her coin pouch and made it easily visible. Leaving her room, she made sure the two hiding in the corner could see her coin pouch. Making her way towards the forest, she could sense the two following behind her carefully. Narrowing her eyes, she flipped her body onto a branch when their line of sight was being covered by a tree. Seeing that Shiro had disappeared, the two rushed into the forest. Say hi to Hades for me. Shiro smiled and summoned her bow, asterisk Pucci,